Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Lapinova and I'm a film programmer at Film East, and today I'm joined by my fellow film programmers Neve Brooke, Shelby Cook, Will Schofield and Alex Smith to discuss the 2011 science fiction film Attack the Block, directed by Joe Cornish. This segment is part of Film East, a Norwich-based young film programmers group supported by Reel Connections. Attack the Block was Joe Cornish's directorial debut, and it recently had a surge of popularity thanks to lead actor John Boyega's appearance in Star Wars. Attack the Block is set in a council estate in South London, and it follows a group of teenagers who try to defend themselves from an alien invasion that happens on Guy Fawkes Night. The film plays with and subverts the tropes of hoodie horror, a subgenre of British horror films. Hoodie horror emerged in the mid to late 2000s, and the narratives follow troublesome lower-class young men who are portrayed as violent and sadistic. Exploring the conservative anxieties of a broken Britain, these films are usually set in low-income council estates and feature themes of poverty, crime, class tensions, and absence of the nuclear family. The term hoodie horror feeds into the negative stereotypes associated with working-class teens being delinquent and intimidating. So guys, what did you think of the film?
I think it's great. I mean, the style of it, it's very sort of quippy. It feels very quintessentially British, but I love, horror when it's got a political message, and it definitely has a lot to say, this film, and I think it does it so wonderfully and so naturalistically in a film with like massive gorilla alien things. So absolutely loved it. It's fantastic.
The first 10 minutes I was watching it, I was like, this is a Neve movie. Like she's gonna like this movie.
I mean, Edgar Wright did executive produce
I know,
this,
and
so
then
of course I was gonna love it.
I saw that at the end and I was like, of course this is a Neve movie. I didn't know what to expect because I knew from Sarah talking about it before that it had like some political undertones to it, but I was just like, the first time watching it, I was just so taken aback by these monsters and like how brutal and like violent it was. And the whole time I was just like, oh my God, I was so distracted by the sci-fi elements of it that I think I feel like I got like what it was trying to say, but I was so distracted by the horror elements of it that I was just like, oh my gosh.
Shelby, I was heartbroken because I was thinking, okay, so it's got all of the like working class Britain elements for Shelby, and it's going to convert Shelby into, the weird sci-fi realm that me and Eve really enjoy. And then I saw your review on Letterboxd and I was like, oh no.
I was so shocked because I feel like I know your taste, Sarah. And when it started getting brutally violent, I was just like, this is not a Sarah movie. I was like, this is not wholesome and happy. And I think I was just expecting it to be like, a kind of nice movie that like, once it started going off the rails, I was just like, oh my God, like I was just not expecting that at all. I feel so seen now that people actually see my Letterboxd reviews. Like I didn't think anyone ever looked at them.
You're an influencer.
I am an influencer. What can I say?
I think that blend of kind of like British gritty kind of realism mixed with the sci-fi elements felt so interesting. Like a lot of the film feels like watching kidulthood or something like that. And then suddenly it's like what would happen if you were watching kidulthood and then aliens showed up in the middle of the movie and started smashing stuff. And it's almost kind of self-parodying in a way, in the kind of excess of it almost.
I really agree with Will. Just the mix of the sci-fi with the working class British and just the madness of the monsters. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think what you guys mentioned is takes us really nicely into the next point, actually, because obviously it has the monster element and sci-fi element, and then it's got these kind of endearing characters who are also very much portrayed in the same way that any other teenagers in a kind of quintessentially British drama and more of those like gritty films would be, especially in like the working class way. So how do you think that the opening scene in which the boys mug Sam at knife point play into the tropes of that kind of hoodie horror trope?
Well, I mean, this isn't my point, but I thought it was a really amazing point, and watching it after I heard this point really changed the way I viewed the sort of the filmmaking of the film. But that opening scene, you follow Sam, you're introduced to this world through, you know, pretty young white woman's eyes. She looks pretty middle class, she looks really, you know, your average Londoner, and she's just on the phone to her mum, and then she gets she gets mugged. And then for the rest of the film, it's from the boys' perspective, and it sort of puts you in that scared place of them, and then gives you the rest of the hour and a half to understand why they're like that and why you shouldn't be afraid of them. Because if you saw them in the street like that, you would be. And it's such an amazing way of introducing you to characters rather than from the get-go being mugged by them and then having to deal with them. It's so great. I love that introduction scene.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love the fact that if you haven't seen the film before, it really gets you to confront your prejudices as a viewer, because you think you're going to follow Sam as a character, and then it completely turns that on its head. And it's really quite clever in the way that it establishes the characters as morally ambiguous, and it kind of, you know, they're kind of anti-heroes, but it doesn't make either Sam or the boys the good people, the bad people, and it really plays with that.
I don't know if anyone knows this, but was this film, so the film came out in 2011, was it before like John Boyega got, I mean, I know it was before Star Wars.
Yeah.
But
this was like his first thing, I think. Like
yeah,
his first
so
big thing.
That's really interesting because he's such a well-known star now. So like I feel like I was more influenced watching this because obviously I work in star studies, so I'm interested in the influence of how actors and stars function within this landscape of the film. So I feel like I was more influenced because I know John Boyega as a star and I really enjoy what he does as an actor. So I feel like I didn't feel as intimidated by him because like I was like, oh, it's John Boyega. And like I have a positive idea of him, as well as Jodie Whittaker. Obviously, we know her. Well, I know her from Broadchurch more so than Doctor Who. But I just thought that was really interesting way to like. I can imagine if you watch this film before John Boyega was a big star, you would have like a very negative connotation about his character, which would give the big like reveal of, you know, what the film's trying to say as, you know, he's a working class boy. This is what he has to do in order to survive in this broken Britain. I feel like that would be more impactful than coming into it knowing that John Boyega is probably going to be a more positive character. I think that just influenced the way that I was viewing the characters.
If I remember correctly, I think a lot of the cast was hired from like drama clubs and stuff and kind of locally.
Yeah, they were from like local council schools from South London. So yeah, I think that they were kind of trying to recreate like a very authentic council estate experience. And at the time, obviously now we know John Boyega is like really famous, but at the time they've hired all of the actors that weren't very well known.
I think that really works in its favor in the sense that some scenes are some of the acting bits are a little bit stilted. As particularly in like horror moments, because that's difficult to do and they're child actors, you know, but at the same time I think because the dialogue is so heavily focused on like slang and kind of niche terminology and stuff that is common, I think it helped a lot that these were clearly people who were, you know, comfortable using that language, whereas if you got someone from RADA or something who's far more formal, I think their reading of it would likely be a lot more it would be less natural. And so I think it worked in the film's favor to hire people who were clearly comfortable with the world and the setting and the dialogue and everything because it's so familiar to them already. Yeah. I'm talking about them like they're some kind of alien species or something.
That's sometimes how they can be, I mean, this is going a bit political now, but that's sometimes how they can be perceived by like the upper classes in Britain. And I think it's interesting that they took kind of, well, yes, unknown actors, because a lot of the times when people are thinking about seeing a film, they think about the stars, the directors, what's familiar to them. And so a lot of people could have just passed over this film thinking that's not relevant to me, I don't care about it. I mean, I'm privileged enough not to have grown up in that kind of environment, but I think a lot of people there feel like the public just ignores them and swooshes over them because they're not relevant to them. They don't care about them. And so I think there's a lot of levels that came into the casting.
I mean,
that's
definitely. Oh, sorry, Shelby, but obviously, like, as we talked about, like the beginning of the film really plays with your perception and like confronts kind of your prejudices, and then after Sam gets mugged, she goes see her neighbor, and like the elderly neighbor is just, you know, describes them as being monsters. So it does play with that, like that a lot, the perceiving of them as other, and also perceiving them as quite like scary, and it plays with that kind of marginalization a lot. So what are you going to say, Shelby?
Oh, I was just going to say that's very typical of this sort of British social realism, is to just cast people just off the street, which I think in a way sort of fetishizes the working class. I mean, I have kind of an issue with social realism in a way because it's all of these upper class people making a film about poor people. And you're just like, oh, you look poor. Let me pick you up off the street and you be in my movie. I mean, that's an issue I have more with social realism than this movie necessarily. But I think the sort of like the innocence of the cast really makes you fall in love with them. Because I'm thinking of that one kid who was like really over the top and just like a total doofus and was just going all over the place and was just really funny. And like that sort of, you know, you have sort of this endearing quality to them. And I feel like that is something that comes from non-trained actors, where you feel like, oh, it's just another person that you're watching.
I want to further that. My favorite character in this film, I can't remember his name, but he's the one who can't see the alien in the park until he puts his glasses on. I think that is one of the funniest things. And I went on IMDb because I was like, I wonder what he's done after this. He's never made another film after this. He did Attack the Block, and that was it. And I think, like, what a waste. He was so funny. Like, he was such a good natural actor. But it's so interesting, like, what a lightning in a bottle casting to have such a brilliant little comedian. He didn't really want to be an actor. Well, that was great.
I just want to go back to your point, Shelby. So obviously you focus on British social realism a lot. I was just wondering, do you think the sci-fi elements of the film make that kind of like better or amplify it more? Or do you think that kind of lets it down? Because I know you haven't kind of loved the film as much as the rest of us.
I think the sci-fi elements take away from a lot of the political messaging, but that's also just from my perspective, because I'm used to watching these social realist films that kind of beat you on the head saying, you should feel depressed after watching this. But I think that is an interesting way. And you see that a lot with more modern British quote unquote social realism, is they will mix this element of fantasy and spectacle. I hate to use that word because that's what our class was called, and our MA was British cinema and spectacle or whatever. But they mix this element of the spectacle into the social realism, so it's more palatable to watch and to understand. And I feel like that's better for like an average audience to be able to digest these really big topics. But then I also kind of feel like in this film in particular, it got lost because I watched it with my mom. My mom's pretty clued up in terms of like, she knows the kind of stuff that I watch, and like I'm teaching her. She's starting to learn how to pick out like what is the underlying message of a film. And it just went right over her head. Like, she didn't get it either. And I mean, I got it because I knew what I was looking for. And I knew that it was going to be a political film because obviously it's about this sort of working class Britain. That's always a political messaging about it. But I feel like the science fiction element kind of distracted from what it was trying to get across.
I kind of disagree. Not like, I understand that it's not really, overtly, well, it is overtly political, but not very heavy-handedly. But there are moments sort of throughout where it's about how they react to the situation. And there's moments where Jodie Whittaker's like, well, just call the police. And they're like, well, we can't do that because they will think we've done this. They will arrest us. And then there's that really poignant moment where John Boyega's like, the government's probably made these to kill us. Like, they just want us gone.
Yeah.
Like, the moments that they do take the time to talk about these issues and what it's like to be a young Black working class, Briton, is really interesting in that through that sci-fi lens, that they're not only having to navigate an alien attack but avoid getting arrested for what the aliens are doing, was a really interesting take on sci-fi.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's something else I really want to discuss as well. So I'm in any like kind of storytelling, I'm a huge sucker for having location be kind of like a character in its own right in a story, like, and I think that's very much the case in Attack the Block, and the film is very isolated in this council estate, in this one specific block. And I think that the use of location and space are used very cleverly in this film to kind of highlight the themes of working class Britain without spelling it out for you. It's still a really fun sci-fi film. It's still full of action, it's still full of humor, it's still full of aliens and spectacle, but they don't have to say it to you with dialogue, but the way that the scenes are laid out visually using space, to me, is just so clever and really significant in kind of showing the cycle of social deprivation and urban decay, especially when you see them running around trying to save themselves. They're driving through walkways and there's all of these levels, but it's kind of like a maze, and they're always getting back to where they started, and they're kind of running in circles basically. To me, I don't know, this might be too film studenty, but to me it's an allegory of social mobility and how actually, because they're so marginalized, that they're very stuck in this one space and they don't feel confident to go ask for help from anyone else. They kind of stick together in this one space. So yeah, that's something that I thought was really like beautifully done in the film.
That's a fantastic point, and something I hadn't thought about.
Obviously, we can't ignore the alien invasion part of the film. So do you think the film works well on its own, just as a fun sci-fi film? Because obviously we've discussed class and social realism a lot and like political aspects of the film. But yeah, do you think it works well on its own as just a fun sci-fi? Like, what do you think of the design of the aliens, that kind of thing?
I absolutely loved it. They're so striking. And because it's that animalistic, it's recognizable to you. So it's even more terrifying, because a big gorilla could actually do that to you, because you know what it's capable of. It's not a new set of rules. It's just a big dog thing that can just savage you. The matte black fur just looked so cool. I love the premise of like the pheromones and it being foreshadowed when they're, doing some illegal things with drugs earlier on in the film. I just think it's incredible. It's such good sci-fi. I love it.
I agree. I think the sci-fi element is really fun, and it mixes like comedy. It does that very British thing where it's very humorous and it's very funny, but it still like has these like really dramatic things. And I think that's what makes it such a unique film and gives it such a great personality, is that it's still kind of is like making fun of itself. Like when they go and beat up the first monster that comes and they're like, oh yeah, we're so tough. And it's just really funny. It is very reminiscent of like the Cornetto trilogy, in that sense that it's like this really insane thing is happening, but like they're laughing the whole time. Like it's still like really funny. So I think that is probably the most endearing part about it.
Yeah, I felt like the individual parts of the movie, be like the commentary or the sci-fi elements and all that stuff, have all been, I think, done better in other places. But the way it kind of mashes them all up in a kind of self-knowing way makes it just like a very, like, shall we say, very interesting experience, very fun, and it's more than the sum of its parts almost in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is so Edgar Wrightian,
yeah,
but it has, I would say, far more to actually say. And like Will said, I completely agree with what you say. It's not gonna, it doesn't do a lot, but mashing a lot of things together, it manages to do something good.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember seeing it for the first time, and I didn't think that so many people from the actual group were going to like dying or get injured. And I was just like, oh, okay, like this is getting serious now.
It's the bit when that guy's head pops off, you're like, oh, yikes. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. I was expecting something nice and wholesome, some wholesome aliens, and then all of a sudden all these people started getting mauled, and I'm just like, oh my god, like this is not what I was expecting at all.
That was something. The first time they encounter it, it's in like a little shed or something, That's like a ET. Was that an ET thing?
It
Because
must
that's the
have
first time they
been.
meet ET.
Mhm.
But instead of like going in having a little handshake or whatever, I haven't seen ET in like 10 years. They just proceed to just beat the ever living stuffing out of it.
Yeah, well, next time I'll bring the wholesome alien films for Shelby.
I just wasn't expecting it. I was like, this is not a Sarah movie. Like, what is this?
Hopefully you have enjoyed our brief discussion today. If you are interested in contributing to our film and television blog, visit film-east.com/submissions for more information. To learn more about Film East and the Young Film Programmers, visit our website film-east.com or follow us on any of our social media @films_east. Again, we're Film East, a Norwich-based young film programming group supported by Reel Connections and part of Film Hub South East and the BFI Fan Network.